Tonight on PrimeTime, President Nicolas Maduro has been taken to New York to face US criminal charges, a move Washington frames as law enforcement, while Caracas calls it an illegal abduction. Allies and critics alike are now questioning legality, sovereignty, and the precedent this sets. A courtroom drama with ominous implications. Well, a very good evening. The White House insists this is not a war, but a legal action. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the United States is enforcing the law, not pursuing regime change. But which law does he mean? Well, tonight we examine what international and US law actually allows and where the limits might lie. But first, let's take a look at this report.
US President Donald Trump said on Sunday that the United States will be in charge of Venezuela after US special forces captured President Nicolas Maduro in a surprise operation. Maduro was flown to New York, where he is being held in a detention center ahead of a court appearance on Monday on drug trafficking charges. His capture has created deep uncertainty about the future of the oil-rich South American country. Speaking aboard Air Force One, Trump said Venezuela is a dead country and claimed the US must bring it back. He said his administration plans to work with remaining members of Maduro's government to curb drug trafficking and restructure the oil industry instead of holding immediate elections. Trump warned that a second US military strike is possible if officials do not cooperate.
The country is a mess. It's been horribly run. The oil is just flowing at a very low level, much lower than, even if it was badly run, it should have more income, more oil than what they're doing. So we're going to have the big oil companies go in. They're going to fix the infrastructure. They're going to invest money. We're not going to invest anything. We're going to just take care of the country. We're going to cherish the country. We're going to take care, more importantly, of the people, including Venezuelans that are living in our country that were forced to leave their country.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the US is not at war with Venezuela but is running policy through financial pressure and sanctions. He said US naval forces are enforcing an oil quarantine to increase leverage.
There's not a war. I mean, we are at war against drug trafficking organizations. It's not a war against Venezuela. We are enforcing American laws with regards to oil sanctions. We have sanctioned entities. We go to court. We get a warrant. We seize those boats with oil, and that will continue.
Meanwhile, Brazil has increased troop and police patrols along its border with Venezuela amid fears of rising refugee flows.
Okay, let's get the latest from Caracas now, where our correspondent Mary Trini Mina is reporting for us. Mary, good to see you. What does daily life actually look like then in Caracas right now? Are people sensing some kind of return to normality, or is there still a real fear that this could escalate further?
Well, Guy, this is a country that is trying to resume its activities in the middle of shocking events that happened on Saturday. Now, on Monday, people are trying to get to their jobs, to go to pharmacies and supermarkets to stock up on medicine and foods because they fear something else could happen in the country, despite that the loyals to Nicolás Maduro remain in power. The Supreme Court of Venezuela designated Delcy Rodriguez, which was the former vice president, now is the interim president of the country. Initially, she said that Nicolás Maduro was kidnapped. She had a strong message for the United States, but now have shifted the speech towards the United States. She said that she is willing to talk to Donald Trump. She sent a message over Instagram saying there's the willing of the Venezuelan people to engage in a cooperation with the United States and address directly President Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said that he is running the country But the authorities in Venezuela claim they are doing so, that they have the control of the borders and all the places in the country. Right now, as I said, well, many places are open. The airport is working, domestic flights are working, and also the parliament will swear in today to begin a new period. This is key and important because the government wants to send a message to the Venezuelan people that they are in control of the situation and not the United States. So far, we have not learned about the number of people that died, resulted killed, or were injured during the three kinetic strikes that took place on Saturday. But so far, it's been informed that 32 Cubans lost their life. They were part of the security team securing the life of Nicolas Maduro. They all died. We are expecting and waiting to know how many Venezuelans were involved and how many of them died. This is the information from Caracas, Venezuela.
Well, my first guest to discuss this tonight is Mark Merowitz, a law professor at State University of New York Maritime College. Professor, good to see you. You're our first guest of 2026. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with the core issue here then. The incursion, the capture, now the courtroom. What is this? What is the precise legal authority that the United States is enacting to seize a foreign leader on another country's soil?
Well, I mean, I'm not concluding anyway, but there is ample precedent on this. There is the situation with Manuel Noriega in 1992 when he was taken from Panama and in fact taken to trial in the United States. But it's also a Supreme Court case called the United States versus Alvarez Machain, which involved a Mexican national who had tortured to death a DEA agent. The DEA agents came, took him back to the United States for trial. The case went to the United States Supreme Court. Supreme Court held in the United States that the fact of respondent's forcible abduction does not prohibit his trial in a United States court for violations of his country's criminal laws. So if you're looking at American law presumably backs this up, although there are a number of defenses and other issues which could be raised in the case. And of course, we're going to certainly be seeing those as the case proceeds against Maduro in the Brooklyn Federal Court.
One of the things that's been quite fascinating about this case as it's developed so far, Mark, is that in past situations where there's been US intervention, the whole notion of oil or energy resources, natural resources, any sort of business interests at all, has been very much kept sort of behind the scenes as a secondary point. Politicians have not dared really to mention that element. President Trump's been pretty bold in talking about the oil, the wealth that's in Venezuela as being a key part of this. Do you think that's, honesty, boldness, transparency, or does it really kind of speak to more of a sort of a cynicism?
I'm a great supporter of President Trump and what he's done, and I support what he did here. And as far as the oil and the things that Trump says, the bottom line here is you have a regime in Venezuela for 20 years under Chavez, Maduro. These characters were running a criminal gang, if you believe the indictment, working with drug cartels, putting drugs into the United States, working with Hezbollah. I mean, your correspondence report is very indicative too, because she talked about the Cubans who were killed in the attack because Maduro had Cuban security agents protecting him, not Venezuelans, as I understand it, Cubans, because Cuba is entrenched in Venezuela. What is Cuba doing in Venezuela? What is Russia doing there? China doing there? Iran doing there? Hezbollah doing there? The whole thing is an outrage in the sense also that there were elections, but the people elected, Machado, Gonzalez, Guaido, and others, were never allowed to take office. Why? Because Chavez and Maduro decided, I'm going to arrest them and put them in prison. Can you imagine? So there is a complete failure understanding what is going on here and what the United States did. Now, Obviously, this is going to be hotly and highly debated in the world, at the UN. We're debating it today, and there are lots of ways to looking at it. To me, the bottom line is, you talk about the oil, the bottom line is restoring the oil economy in Venezuela, which Maduro, Chavez, and his gang destroyed, and allow the Venezuelans who fled from Venezuela to come back to Venezuela. That, to me, is the game plan to bring freedom to the Venezuelan people. And that was what they were deprived of by Maduro and Chavez and Rodriguez and his gang. They have to get out, and they have to let free elections and have people elected and transition to a free society. So yes, Trump talks about the oil. It's very important to bolster and re-up the economy of Venezuela, of course, and to bring back the people there and let them live in freedom and prosperity. They're not. They haven't been. And why? Because the leadership there turned the place into a narco state. I mean,
I think
come on. I mean, to me, it's for itself.
I think there have been almost, you would have to look a very long way to find another world leader who, obviously would say positive things to support President Maduro. I mean, everybody has characterized this individual, that regime, as being certainly not a positive one. Nevertheless, does that really give the US the authority, the power to intervene? And doesn't it set a dangerous precedent that there are, of course, questionable regimes, bad people, if you like, in all sorts of countries around the world? We live in such an interconnected market economy now, also an interconnected black market economy behind the scenes. What does this say? Does this not send a signal to other powerful countries that if they don't like an individual, if they don't approve of the state, that they can just go and sort of invade?
You see, I don't see it that way. I mean, certainly I'm looking at it from the point of view of America, American law, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to look at it from the point of view of America. But I don't think that's the lesson and the message here. I think the message that's being sent is to the regimes like Iran and North Korea. Iran is collapsing. Maybe Cuba is the next one. Cuba's not a legitimate regime. It's a dictatorship. And the fact is, the people out there, like the Iranians and the Cubans and the others, who have been running this authoritarian dictatorships, are going to get a message that no, they can't do that in a civilized world. And I think that's the message that is being sent by the United States. Now, as I said, debating whether the United States could do this or not, from my point of view, that's going to take place in the courtroom in the United States. And look, if the court probably will go to the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court says that his abduction was illegal, then he'll be sent back. I mean, I think there's a rule of law here in the United States, which is absent in Venezuela. You have people standing on the streets around the world, Guy, dancing on the streets because Maduro is out. That to me tells me something very, very important, is that freedom will always triumph. And the United States, I think, as believers in American, that America's role in the world is to facilitate that. I don't think to send messages that if you don't like someone, I don't think the message is the United Kingdom is going to take that message. I think the United Kingdom and other democracies in the world are going to see this as something positive because nobody did anything about it. I mean, these guys were in there doing their narco state and nobody did a thing about it. Not in particular the United Nations. Did the United Nations do a thing about it? Nothing. And now the United Nations sits there in New York, right, a few miles away from that court, and having meetings that are going to condemn Trump and they're going to condemn the United States, which is what which they exult in doing, and which is exactly the point, that they never did anything about this and never helped the Venezuelan people.
I mean, people.
And that shows me that this might be positive.
Sorry to interrupt, Mark. I think people will always debate international law as possibly being slightly more malleable, if you like, and open to interpretation than individual rules within sovereign nations. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, you are. When you look at the calls by Venezuela, who describe this, certain officials, as a kidnapping, from a legal standpoint, where exactly is this line between arrest and unlawful abduction?
Well, that's the question in the court, in the Brooklyn court with Mr. Maduro. I mean, is this abduction lawful? Was Noriega's abduction lawful? Was the abduction of the Mexican national who tortured to death an American DEA agent lawful? If somebody commits a crime in another country against the United States or against another country, same idea, extraterritorial jurisdiction may be applicable. You can't create a narco state and bring drugs. This is what the indictment says. I'm taking that as to be could be proven as alleged. If you're doing that, then the country that's affected has the right, even under international law, to go and seek redress. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. Now, you mentioned the ideas of international law. Now, of course, there are immunities in American law for head of state immunity. And that was argued in Noriega, and it will be argued by him. I'm the head of state. I'm immune. That's American law. But is he the head of state? He was recognized by Obama and other presidents as head of state, but obviously the United States under Trump doesn't recognize him. There's another immunity for official acts. We're going to get a very good lesson in international law and federal law in this case. As a matter of fact, I'm going to assign this case to my constitutional law students to try to answer the exact question you just asked me. Is the abduction legal? It's a great question.
I'm sure
I don't know the answer.
I'm sure for many, many years, many decades to come, that this case will be debated by your students and many others. And just looking at this legal element then, this has been a fast-moving situation. I guess necessarily there have been different interpretations, different comments at times which may have been perceived as inconsistent. Secretary Rubio talked about the involvement of the FBI. There's been comments from the president, from others, which suggest more of a regime change strategy. Is this about law enforcement action, or is it about an act of regime change? And is it acceptable to sort of talk about the two interchangeably?
I don't think listening to Trump that he was talking a lot about that. He even said Machado's not ready to take leadership, even though she was elected. She's not able to do it. He's talking about working with Dulce Rodriguez, the vice president of this criminal group, whatever, of the so-called president put in by the so-called Supreme Court. But he is talking about a transition, and maybe, and I'll be optimistic. I hope that we would avoid further conflict and that we could transition to a free and fair elections in Venezuela and no regime change. Regime change in Venezuela, I don't know that that's in the cards. I don't see it. I don't know if it's so difficult, insurmountable. The one thing the United States wants to implement is controlling the oil reserves, and so that the oil resources can be used for the people of Venezuela. And that is a very meritorious thing. I think we have small steps here. I don't think the United States, by doing this one thing, is going to create a regime change in its entirety. And I don't even think that's the motivation. The Monroe Doctrine, which was updated by the Teddy Roosevelt corollary, basically says if there's instability in the Western Hemisphere, the United States can go in and intervene. And we've done it in Grenada and other ones, right? Okay. I don't think that's talking about regime change. I think it's going in there and creating stability. If there can be stability in Venezuela and transition to a democracy, I think that is a big accomplishment. And I would give kudos to Trump. And I don't think that he, should be criticized. Well, what's your next day after, and what are you going to do tomorrow? And this, who knows the answer to that? The answer is Maduro's out of there. He's standing trial. I think that's very helpful to bring that out in the open, all of the things the United States is accusing him of, and see if they stick. And if it sticks, like with Noriega, he'll be convicted. If they don't, or it'll be overturned in the Supreme Court, that will show that the United States is a nation of laws.
And Mark, finally, I just want to ask you about the UN. I mean, to many the way that Trump wields power is effective, advantageous, very welcome. To others, it's concerning. What do you think this situation says about the role of the UN? Have they to some degree been rendered impotent by this action? I mean, we've been hearing all day lots of speeches, discussions, meetings, committees taking place. Does the president really care? Is he just going to do what he's going to do anyway?
See, I don't think it works that way because I think the United Nations, which you refer to, I mean, is a completely ineffective institution. And the reason is the way it's structured with the veto. And that's the same thing. The US will veto a resolution here, and the Chinese and the Russians, and so forth. UN needs a reset. It does not function as an effective peacekeeper in the world. It hasn't. It did in the beginning. It was very optimistic to do something to fix peace in the world. It doesn't do that. And so, yes, well, if the United States and its leadership don't respect the UN, I think that disrespect, if no lack of respect, if even better, is really merited because they have made no effort whatsoever since the inception of the UN to fix it and make it more than just, kind of a great power tool. But the fact is, when the UN was created by the great powers, the one precondition was that the UN could never be used against a great power. So this is exactly the limitation which hobbles the UN. In a world that we live in today with so much conflict and so many problems, I think that some of the things that can be solved should be solved. And if this Venezuela situation leads to a better life for the Venezuelan people and freedom, then I think it's a very good thing, putting aside everything else. But keep in mind also the very, very spirited debate around the world, but also in the US, where you have congressmen saying the president has no power to do this. What did he do here? There's lively rule of law, democracy, freedom of expression. These are wonderful things that regretfully the Venezuelan people were deprived of by this gang of people. And that gang is out, and their friends from China, Russia, Hezbollah, I'm assuming like the rats sinking on the sinking ship, they're going to be gone, and the Cubans in particular. So maybe if the people of Venezuela get something good out of this, and they'll be able to have a nice economy and not stand in bread lines or whatever it is they do there, then we have something good. That's kind of the way I feel about it. I think it's today. We don't know what's going to come tomorrow, but I think the focus is interesting to see what goes on in that trial, and to see that Maduro, you will see, will get a fair trial. He have a good lawyer. He's going to bring up all these cases. He's going to argue everything in America, where he couldn't do that, where people couldn't do that in Venezuela. So I think there is a lesson here. I think we have to be realistic and candid about this. But I don't think the United States is in regime change mode here. I don't think so.
Professor Mark Merowitz, we thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, after the break, we're going to take a look at this growing international backlash as Washington faces criticism over its military action against Venezuela. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Now, the US military action against Venezuela has triggered swift international condemnation. Colombia, Brazil, and Cuba are among those denouncing the strikes, urging dialogue, while a number of governments and organizations say Washington's move breaches international law.
The governments of Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Uruguay, and Spain, in a joint statement, expressed deep concern over the situation in Venezuela. They reject any unilateral military actions, call for a peaceful, inclusive political process led by Venezuelans, and urge respect for international law, sovereignty, and regional stability. They call for a peaceful and inclusive political process led by Venezuelans themselves, respect for sovereignty and human rights, and urge the international community to support dialogue and de-escalation to preserve stability in the region. Each of these countries has also separately condemned the violence in their own statements. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has strongly condemned the US airstrikes on Venezuela and immediately called for an urgent meeting of the United Nations and the Organization of American States. Petro wrote on his official X account, "Caracas is being bombed right now," adding that the attacks are being carried out with missiles. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva described the operation as a violation of international law and a disregard for Venezuela's sovereignty. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel called the action a criminal attack and urged the international community to respond immediately. Mexico's Ministry of Foreign Affairs criticized the operations as a breach of Article 2 of the UN Charter and a threat to regional peace. CARICOM, Latin American countries and other leaders, including the Ecuadorian President Gabriel Noboa, condemned the US operation and called for dialogue. The Cuban government also strongly condemned the US military actions and reaffirmed their support for Venezuela and its population. The Spanish government called for de-escalation and compliance with the principles of international law, while British Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed that the UK was not involved and emphasised the importance of upholding international law. The European Union also reacted. EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs Kaja Kallas and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen expressed support for the people of Venezuela and backed a peaceful and democratic transition. Russia condemned the US military actions as armed aggression and called for dialogue, warning that Maduro's capture could further escalate tensions in the region. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei stressed the need to stand firm against external pressure on the country and its people. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha highlighted human rights violations under Maduro's regime and called for respect for international law, democracy, and the interests of the Venezuelan people.
Well, joining me now to discuss this is our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Ube Shahbanda. Ube, good to see you. We've just heard that Maduro has now arrived at the courthouse and is due, we think, to appear officially in about 30 minutes' time. And I was talking to Mark Merowitz just a few moments ago about the extent to which President Trump takes the United Nations seriously. We know the UN Security Council has now met. What's coming through so far, and where do you think that leaves Washington diplomatically?
Yeah, that's right. From Caracas to Manhattan, it's been quite a journey for the former leader of Venezuela. We have heard from the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Mike Waltz himself, a veteran of Special Operations Forces, speaking to the UN Security Council, stating that the message from the Trump administration is that America is not at war with Venezuela and not an occupying force. This is not a war against the Venezuelan people. Those were the words of Ambassador Mike Waltz as he's speaking to the United Nations. Clearly, the message here from the Trump administration is that this is a very narrowly focused law enforcement operation, but with major geopolitical implications here. The Trump administration making very clear this is not regime change, or though certainly it does remove Maduro from power, but the instruments of his regime, for the most part, remain in place for now. President Trump speaking to reporters on Air Force One as he was returning back to Washington, D.C., kept open the possibility of future follow-on strikes against Venezuela if the vice president, who is now the new president of Venezuela, does not, in the words of President Trump, behave or act accordingly. So that remains to be seen what that entails. So we've seen the vice president, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and the Secretary of State making the case to the American public and to the international community, which, from the perspective of the Trump administration, does not really really factor into President Trump's decision making as the commander in chief of the American forces, because the main underlying principle behind the decision by President Trump to authorize this extraordinary special operation to capture Maduro in the heart of Caracas, and within just a matter of a couple of days bring him into a courthouse in Manhattan to face trial. The decision making here is based on the, of course, national security imperatives that, in the words of senior Trump administration officials, that this was not a legitimate leader, but a drug kingpin. This is the perspective of the Trump administration. And so you're going to hear from at least two members, permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and Russia, who had spent billions of dollars and loaned billions of dollars to the Maduro government, the former Maduro government. They are certainly not going to be happy, given that Maduro was an important client of theirs. And we had a Chinese government delegation in Caracas who had just arrived, had just met with Maduro just a few hours before those Delta Force operators and the Special Operations Aviation Regiment landed in Caracas. And Russia had given billions of dollars in loans and in military hardware to Maduro. None of those long-range radars provided by the Chinese or those long-range anti-air missiles provided by Russia had any impact on those American forces. Hundreds of American planes and drones and dozens of specially modified attack helicopters were used in a very complex operation that included CIA operatives on the ground and cyber attacks against the electric grid network. But the Trump administration making the case right now to the United Nations, with the American ambassador to the United Nations saying that this is not a war against the people of Venezuela.
Ube, let's talk about the legalities of this. I mean, if you listen to some analysts, they would describe international law almost like one of those chocolate sort of treat boxes that too many of us have been enjoying over the holiday period. You can sort of pick the ones you like and discard the rest. We know that international law is essentially something that's more complex, and it is possible to interpret different elements differently depending on the case you're trying to make. Nevertheless, there have been many individuals, organizations, states who've been heavily critical of this, who question the legality, who are very clear that this is a breach of international law. How is the US responding to that criticism?
Well, the Trump administration's case for this operation is that it deeply embedded as part of the core of the United Nations Charter is the right of every sovereign country to defend itself, defend its people, and its sovereignty. As President Trump said in his address to the American people, which was also, he was also speaking to the whole world in the immediate aftermath of this special operations operation in Caracas, was that this is a matter of stopping the flow of drugs that are killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. This is a matter of an operation that's targeting a drug kingpin, not a leader of a sovereign country, because the United States does not recognize Maduro as the legitimate leader of Venezuela. So the case being made here by President Trump, by the vice president, by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has been really at the forefront of the Venezuela policy for the Trump administration, is that America has the right, a right which is enshrined in the United Nations Charter, to defend its people, to defend the American people from the flow of drugs that are killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. President Trump said a number of upwards of 300,000, according to President Trump's calculation, that are being killed by these drugs that are loaded in the docks in Venezuela on these fast-moving ships and semi-submersibles that then are transported illegally into the United States. And so this is, if there's any discussion of international law, the Trump administration is really focusing on the right of the United States to defend its people against cartels.
Okay, so not war. Very clearly the defense being put forward is that this is about legal due process, law enforcement. We know that Nicolas Maduro is at the courthouse, expected, as we've said, to appear formally very shortly. How central is this now, this court appearance, this discussion that's going to take place, the formality of this process? How central is this now to the overall legal process?
Well, the indictment itself in the Southern District of New York was really a very important element in the justification for this operation to capture Maduro. We've heard from Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's listed out and published the full indictment: conspiracy to commit narco-terrorism and to use weapons against American forces. So now it is going to be in the hands of the American court system. And so that really has been a very important backbone of this operation, that this was a matter of justice, a matter of law enforcement. We heard from the senior Trump administration officials time and time again following this operation, really stressing the fact that this is about bringing Maduro in front of a court of law, and that this is now a matter of the Department of Justice and not the Department of War. Very interesting tidbit was that of information coming out of this operation is that reportedly FBI agents who handled domestic security were part of the Special Operations Task Force to capture Maduro, to give it an element of domestic security that is not just in a matter of an international military operation. We've seen in previous instances where the Department of War and the Department of Justice come together here with the ongoing trial of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a key mastermind behind the 9/11 terror attacks. But what we do know is that this process could take a very long time, and that there is precedent in the American case law to bring a former head of a country to trial in American courts. We have seen a number of Mexican cartel leaders brought to court in the United States to face justice. So there is the Department of Justice is arguing that there is case law here, but this is going to be probably one of the biggest court cases federally in the United States, with Maduro facing arraignment and a slew of charges by the Department of Justice, with conspiracy to commit narco-terrorism at the top of those accusations.
Ube, the world is obviously watching this develop. Latin American governments in particular have been quick to call for dialogue, for de-escalation. Is there any sign, do you think, that the US is adjusting its approach? Because, on the one hand, there's an argument for due process, law, justice, clarity, transparency, but isn't that inconsistent with President Trump's strategy of, in a sense, trying to keep these governments unsettled, to have them guessing and not being sure about what he might do next?
It was very interesting. President Trump immediately, following the operation to capture Maduro, sent a warning to President Petro of Colombia, saying that the leadership in Colombia should take heed of what happened to Maduro, given the Trump administration's accusations that the Colombian government is turning a blind eye to cocaine factories in Colombia that are also shipping drugs into the United States. And on Air Force One, President Trump and Senator Lindsey Graham sent a warning to Cuba. Of course, the Cuban government is deeply embedded with Venezuela. Maduro was surrounded by Cuban special operators and intelligence officers who formed his protective detail, and the Cuban Special Intelligence Service is deeply embedded in Venezuela to support the former Maduro regime, attempting to keep him in power. Obviously, they failed. So, and we've heard again from President Trump and from senior Trump allies here in Washington that both Colombia and Cuba should be duly warned that, hey, this could happen to you, that the United States views the Western Hemisphere and Latin America as its backyard and will not allow countries to bring in China, to bring in Iran, or to ship tons of drugs that are killing Americans without some sort of repercussions. So I think it was very notable that President Trump brought up Colombia, brought up Cuba on a number of instances following the capture of Nicolas Maduro. Perhaps this will not be the last Delta Force operation in Latin America. Time will tell.
And Ube, we've spoken about the international reaction, those who are supportive, those who are critical. What about the media's interpretation of this within the US, those big US media brands? On balance, how are they evaluating the situation?
There's really a fascination by the American media on how this operation came to be, the fact that it was not leaked. Everything here in Washington leaks, although it does seem that in the very last minute of the 11th hour, the details of this operation, the fact that it was going to happen, were leaked to the New York Times and the Washington Post, but they held off until after the operation to report the details. So there is a deep-seated fascination by the mainstream media across the political spectrum on when the Trump administration decided to take this type of extraordinary action. The backdoor, behind the scenes politics with a number of mainstream media outlets discussing how the Trump administration had reportedly given a number of offers to Maduro to leave the country to a friendly country in the Arabian Gulf in exchange for a deal, which Maduro reportedly had rejected. And of course, details on the highly secretive unit Delta Force operators, Task Force Orange, and CIA agents that had set the ground months in advance with agents on the ground in Venezuela, according to these reports coming out of Washington, that were able to give real-time intelligence to American Special Forces operators on the movements of Maduro minute by minute, that allowed American Special Forces operators to capture Maduro, despite the fact that he was heavily protected. So the fact that there were no American casualties really is being celebrated across the media here. Of course, there are major questions on what comes next. President Trump has said that the United States is now going to control Venezuela. What does that necessarily entail? Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that this means that the U.S. is going to use its leverage with the oil blockade of Venezuela and keeping open the possibility of follow-on strikes as leverage to ensure that the current government, the post-Maduro Venezuela, adheres to American demands. And what will happen with American oil companies who've had their assets nationalized by Venezuela years ago? Of course, that was a main concern by President Trump. So the media spectrum here in Washington really seems to be celebrating the bold, decisive nature of President Trump's actions here. The fact that despite the high risk nature of this special forces operations, that no Americans were killed, but there are still major questions on how well the United States, from a policy and governance standpoint, how will Washington move forward in ensuring that Venezuela, the new Venezuela, adheres to President Trump's demands.
Very interesting, the long arm of President Trump's law. Ube, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington, as always. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at divided reactions in Venezuela as uncertainty lingers over who is actually running the country. Do stay with us. A warm welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Venezuelans have shared split opinions about the capture of President Nicolas Maduro. Now, this comes as there still remains uncertainty about who is actually running the country.
Following a US military operation in Venezuela on Saturday that led to the capture and removal of President Nicolas Maduro, who has led the country for the past 12 years, reactions have been mixed as Venezuela enters an uncertain new era. In the United States, Venezuelan citizens took to the streets to celebrate Maduro's capture. Many thanked US President Donald Trump for ordering the operation and expressed optimism about the country's future.
Today I feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's some hope. I feel like there will be a space that will become our own for every Venezuelan out here and every Venezuelan in Venezuela too. We have the right to have a place that we're proud of and where we belong, that was taken from us more than 20 years ago. So.
Similar sentiments were echoed in Mexico, where demonstrators marched carrying Venezuelan flags and signs reading freedom for the South American nation.
Freedom is so great. Even though I'm here, my family is over there. But my children are here. My grandchildren are here. My grandchildren are going to know a free Venezuela. My grandson is going to be able to go to a supermarket and buy things. My grandchildren will be able to go to the hospital. My grandchildren will be free in their country.
Meanwhile, in Venezuela, thousands of government supporters gathered in the streets of Caracas to demand Maduro's return. Following the military operation, Trump announced that Venezuela would be placed under American control until what he described as a proper judicial transition takes place. Maduro's supporters have rejected the idea of US governance and warned of retaliation.
We are free and sovereign. We are a people with guarantees in the Bolivarian Constitution. We are a free people, free and sovereign. Donald Trump is not going to take our oil. Rubio is not going to govern us. We have a president and a vice president who will assume for now. But our president is Nicolas Maduro. We don't want Rubio here. We don't want Maria Corina, and we don't want Edmundo. When Maria Corina enters, we'll go after her. When Edmundo enters, we'll go after them. We have a president and vice president. Respect sovereign peoples. Enough of so much mockery, of so much violence. We are free and sovereign.
Maduro, who is being held at a detention center in New York, is expected to appear in court on Monday, where he faces drug trafficking charges.
Joining me now to discuss this in more detail and the more human side of the situation, as well as the energy implications, is Mr. Hasla Iglesias, a Venezuelan political activist in exile and an expert on oil politics. Mr. Iglesias, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We heard some mixed views there from the citizens of Venezuela. You're obviously an expert, but you're also self-evidently a human being, a normal person too. When you see these pictures, how does it make you feel? Is it an emotional reaction, a moving moment for you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And of course, all this weekend have been really emotional and really moving all of us Venezuelans all around the world. The images we just saw are people from the diaspora celebrating that Maduro is not on power, and also people supporting the regime. But if we go to the last election, the last number or the last picture we have of the opinion environment in Venezuela, it was like that 70% of the population voted for the opposition candidate, and only around 30% of the voters support Maduro. That 30% is important, and they're going to continue to be part in the country. But the sovereignty of the country is expressed to the people's will, and the people's will is that almost a year and a half ago that Maduro had to leave the presidency. And today, what we are seeing is that occurred not as we wanted. We wanted a peaceful, ordered, and democratic transition, but Maduro is the only one responsible for how it ended. He had the opportunity to give power to those who won democratically the election. He had the opportunity to give power or to cede power through negotiations and through different scenarios, but he was the one who decided to be take down in this way.
And to some people, this US move is very much about accountability, about justice. To others, it's seen as a breach of sovereignty. How is this debate being played out amongst Maduro's opponents now? Because I would imagine that even those who are very grateful to President Trump nevertheless may have some trepidation about the extent to which Washington might now try to exert control.
Yeah, on the one hand, we think that this move was legitimate of taking over a dictator who stole an election, who has been oppressing his people for over 20 years, who is also accused of committing crimes against humanity, not only narco traffic and weapons and money laundering as the ones who is being charged right now in New York, but also crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Court, which is an investigation that continues. And we hope that he will be indicted and condemned of such crimes as well. But also that we had to reach to this point is an evidence that international law is not working. International law failed us. And now those who are saying that what occurred is a breach of international law, they are telling us that international law does not work to protect civilians, that does not work to keep dictators from oppressing their people, from stealing their money, from pressing people into poverty, in extreme poverty, into hunger and into death, even persecuting political opposition, putting them into jail, forcing over 9 million people into exile, torturing people. Well, international law does not work for that, apparently. But it has to work when the dictator is taken in front of justice. This is what makes us really, or that moves us really. We were asking for help from the international community for years, for decades, and we received silence based on sovereignty and autodetermination of the people. But when we, Venezuelans, voted to elect a different president, the election was stolen, the opposition was imprisoned. In this year and a half from the election, several people has been killed in detainment centers, in prison, under state custody. Several people has been tortured. Several people has been or have been stripped from their rights, their human rights, by maintaining them in prison. And we were really certain that the only way out was through the use of military power. We expected that occurred by Venezuelan military officials that could bring the regime down to support the constitution. That didn't occur, and we are grateful that at least one country had made use of their force to make us nearer to democracy. We hope that this doesn't have to repeat again, that international order and international law has to be reformed, so not only dictatorships and wars do not occur in the future, but also that there is never again a need for a foreign country to intervene into another country. This has to be made through a strong international law that we haven't seen so far.
Forgive me, Hazlitt, but it's a very interesting question, this, because I'd be interested to explore with you what element of international law isn't working. Is it the lack of enforcement? Do you almost see a distinction between the multilateral organizations, the United Nations, the Nobel Committee even, with lots of words and sound bites, we stand with you echoing across conference arenas, but not any actual practical enforcement action, versus President Trump, who, despite his many critics, has at least taken physical action. Is that the distinction that you see?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we are sick and tired of declarations and of documents that are really good, actually, condemning what is happening. And we are sure that those documents are going to be useful into the courts to accuse them and to prove that they have committed the crimes they're accused of. But if we didn't get them to court, those documents are useless. So at this point, we are having them in court, and these documents are going to be useful. But the international community has to go beyond documents, has to go beyond declarations, has to go beyond statements, because what happens is that these countries, these authoritarian countries, get away with what they're doing because they shield themselves with the sovereignty and autodetermination of peoples, but at the end they are the ones stealing sovereignty of their people. They're the ones oppressing their people and getting away with that. So we agree. It's not the ideal situation that a single country can do whatever they want with their military power, but if that's the case, if that's the only solution to our crisis, because international organizations have been impotent to actually keep dictatorship, to crush their people, we are grateful that at least that happened, and that at least we are a step closer to democracy and to freedom, if this transition is correctly steered towards that direction.
And let's talk about that transition now, because just as there'll be many like you who will welcome this focus on action versus documents and sort of conference room committee sound bites, it nevertheless does come with potential dangers. I mean, anywhere that there's ever been anything approaching a regime change, an intervention from a big, powerful country, there's always been not just expected problems, but also unexpected problems too. How worried are you about getting this transition right?
Well, that would be the case in any transition scenario. Even if we were able to conduct a transition only with Venezuelan people, with Venezuelan military, political parties, and civil society, even in that scenario, any transition is fragile, and any transition can even be reverted in the time. And we have seen that many times in history. So since every transition is fragile, we want this to be conducted with really understanding the reality of Venezuela, with having clear that we are facing, and we are still facing, an authoritarian regime. I mean, Maduro was removed, but the structure that remains in power at this moment in Venezuela is the same political party that, and the same circle of people that has been ruling the country with Maduro for the last decade or more than a decade. So we have to steer this transition towards the application of the people's will that was expressed in 2024 election. But to get to that point, we have to get rid of several disruptions within the country, and also keeping the opportunity for Venezuelans to decide their own fate. We understand that at this moment, the US has both interests and power to enforce some of their demands. But we hope and we expect that, for example, Secretary Rubio, who has Cuban ascent, and he knows what being Latin American is like, and he knows how living under a dictatorship is like, he will help us get to the point of putting in place a government elected by the people, supported by the people, and with a military force that are going to obey that government elected by the people. That may take some time, and we are aware of that, and we are, from this point, and even Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez are already working on, when we get to that point, we're going to be prepared and to enforce all the law and the policies that are needed to reconstruct, rebuild our country.
And Hasler, you mentioned some of Washington's interests there. Let's just talk about one of them. I mean, President Trump has been unembarrassed about discussing oil energy revenues as part of the equation here. How do you feel about that? Access to oil revenues is clearly going to be part of this, in some way a condition, in some way the price of the intervention that's come from Washington.
Yeah, Venezuela has always been, in all its oil history, the main provider of oil to the United States. We are nearby, we are a huge source of oil, and we were for decades a trustworthy commercial and trade ally. We were a trustworthy oil provider to the US, and the US invested for decades in oil industry in Venezuela. And thanks to that investment is that Venezuela at a certain point was able to manage themselves or ourselves our oil reserves. All that stopped when Maduro started violating human rights, violating election results, and dismantling democracy. Until that point, the US government decided to stop buying oil from Venezuela. And we celebrated that at that point, because there was a sanction on those who were violating the rights, our rights, who were dismantling our democracy. Now, and what happened? Well, Venezuela started selling oil to China. It started selling oil to India. It started selling oil to countries that are, on the one hand, far away, which increases the cost of shipping and reduces the revenues for the country, and on the other hand, aligning us with a wicked international group of countries who are not supporting democracy or human rights. So, if in any case, when we dreamt of having democracy in Venezuela, it was returning. I mean, the most profitable customer or buyer for Venezuelan oil is always the U.S. They are near to the country. They are even the infrastructure to refine our heavy oil that we have, and not having to make any additional investment to refurbish or upgrade any refinery, because they already have these facilities, because they for years received Venezuelan oil. So for us, this is not a critical issue. This has always been the case. Venezuela has benefited from this trade relationship. It was affected when this trade relationship stopped as a cause of the behavior of Maduro, and we prefer having the U.S. as a trade ally than having China, Iran, India, and all these other countries that are a bad influence and that has kept Maduro for years, supporting them with intelligence, weapons, credits, lends, and any kind of support.
Mr. Iglesias, we thank you very much for joining us. Currently in exile, we hope a much more positive future ahead for you and for many of your fellow citizens. Thank you very much for joining us.
Many thanks for covering this.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime now. Andy Mioch is with us to take a look at the top business news stories of the day. Andy, what's on the agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, tonight we'll be taking a look at how the global markets responded to the situation in Venezuela. There are some stories on AI, as well as some news out of the auto industry and currency world. So let's have a look. Start of the week saw gains on the European and Asian stock markets as investors turned to defense industry stocks and safe haven assets following the geopolitical changes over the weekend. American oil giants also saw a rise after U.S. President Donald Trump said he intends to send U.S. oil companies into Venezuela.
European stocks kicked off the week on firmer footing as US military strikes on Venezuela stirred fresh geopolitical concerns and sent investors piling into defense industry stocks on Monday. The advance, coming after a holiday lull, highlights expectations of structurally higher defense spending, despite some recent weakness in the sector's stocks, driven by speculation over a potential ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. The Pan-European Stocks 600 climbed as much as 0.6% to 599.6, a record high. The defense index rose 3.3% to its highest level in nearly 3 months. Technology and basic resources were also up 2.3% and 2.1% respectively. Germany's stock benchmark DAX 2 scaled a new record high, last up 1%, with defense manufacturer Rheinmetall leading the index with a 7% gain. Most Asia-Pacific stock markets have risen on Monday, with defense stocks rising across Japan and South Korea. In Tokyo, defense contractor IHI has jumped 9%, with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries up 8.4%. Shares of South Korean defense giant Hanwha Aerospace are up by 7%. Japan's benchmark Nikkei share average jumped nearly 3% during its first trading session of 2026, as Japan's finance minister hoped more record highs would be reached this year. The Nikkei was up 2.7%, snapping a 2-session losing streak at year-end. The broader Topix climbed to a record high, rising 2%. In a keynote speech, Japanese Finance Minister Satsuki Katayama vowed that Japan would never return to deflation under any circumstances. Meanwhile, shares of major American oil companies surged in early trading on Monday after US President Donald Trump said he intends to send US oil companies into Venezuela to fix its infrastructure and tap into its rich oil reserves. ExxonMobil rose 3.3%, ConocoPhillips shares rose 8.7%, while Chevron's shares briefly soared more than 10%. When it comes to safe haven assets, gold has jumped by more than 2% to $4,420 an ounce, towards the record highs set at the end of last year. Silver's up around 4% at $75.5 an ounce, adding to its strong gains in 2025.
On to artificial intelligence, Samsung plans to double the number of mobile devices featuring its Galaxy AI technology this year, primarily powered by Google's Gemini. The plan might help Google in its race with OpenAI and others to attract more consumers to their artificial intelligence model.
Samsung could give Google a major boost in the AI race. The South Korean firm's co-CEO said it plans to double the number of its mobile devices with Galaxy AI features this year, and it will largely be powered by Google's Gemini. Samsung already rolled out Gemini-backed AI features to about 400 million products by last year. It now plans to raise that figure to 800 million over the next 12 months. The company's co-CEO TM Roh told Reuters previously, Samsung will apply AI to all products and services as quickly as possible. Samsung is the world's largest supporter of Google's Android mobile platform. Its latest plan helps Google in its race with OpenAI and others to attract more consumers to their AI model. One leading researcher said Samsung will offer integrated AI services across consumer products to widen its lead over Apple in such features. Google launched the latest version of Gemini in November. Samsung shares ended up 7.5% on Monday. Investors bought in as it's thought the company is due to reveal a profit jump for the fourth quarter later this week.
Still with AI, hundreds of companies showcased their latest innovations in Las Vegas ahead of the annual CES event. This year's edition focuses on integrating artificial intelligence into consumer electronics.
Hundreds of companies showcased their latest gadgets and tech innovations in Las Vegas on Sunday at CES Unveiled, a media preview event that sets the stage for the bigger tech industry trade show opening on Tuesday. AI is the main focus of CES 2026, according to the Consumer Technology Association, which produces the event, formerly known as the Consumer Electronics Show. Among the first-time exhibitors was China's X-Origin, who showed off an AI robot companion named Yombo, who can teach children how to use AI prompts. Chinese robotics company Zeroth presented a compact, lightweight humanoid robot that can use different autonomous AI software systems, known as agents, to match the needs of different people in a family. CES runs from January 6th through 9th and features thousands of exhibitors across 13 venues and 250,000 square meters. Among the 2026 highlights are keynote addresses from Yuanqing Yang, chairman and CEO of Lenovo, the world's largest personal computer manufacturer, and AI chip giant NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang.
A strong demand for all things AI led Foxconn to post record fourth quarter revenue of more than $82 billion. The world's largest contract electronics maker is, however, yet to report its fourth quarter earnings.
Foxconn, the world's largest contract electronics maker, reported record fourth quarter revenue on Monday, driven by strong demand for artificial intelligence products. Revenue for NVIDIA's biggest server maker and Apple's top iPhone assembler jumped 22.07% from the same quarter last year to $82.7 billion. Foxconn said revenue for the quarter grew significantly on both a quarter-on-quarter and year-on-year basis, exceeding its expectations and creating a high base of comparison for the first quarter of 2026. For the first quarter, information and communications technology products have entered a seasonal slowdown, Foxconn said in the statement. However, robust demand for AI server rack products, even against the elevated fourth quarter base, is expected to bring performance toward the upper end of its past 5-year range. The growth was driven by strong performance in Foxconn's cloud and networking products division, led by booming demand for AI products, while its smart consumer electronics segment, which includes iPhones, posted a slight revenue decline due to unfavorable exchange rates. Foxconn, formerly called Hon Hai Precision Industry, will report fourth quarter earnings in March.
In the auto industry, the new year brought a new leader in the EV market. BYD has surpassed Tesla as the world's largest electric vehicle manufacturer, with 2.2 million battery-powered EVs sold in 2025.
China's BYD overtook Tesla as the world's largest electric car maker in 2025, after the US company run by Elon Musk reported a slump in deliveries at the end of the year. BYD sold 2.2 million battery electric cars during the year, outstripping the 1.6 million deliveries reported by Tesla for the same period. The switch is a symbolic moment in the rise of China's car companies, which have used the transition to electric cars to try to dominate the global automotive industry. Chinese car exports have risen in recent years, led by BYD and rivals such as SAIC and Chery. BYD said sales outside of China climbed to a record 1 million vehicles in 2025, up about 150% from 2024. Electric car sales have continued to grow in the past 2 years, but the rate of growth has been slower than expected. Electric car makers have been forced to cut prices aggressively, and governments around the world have rolled back targets on the shift away from petrol. Tesla's sales appear to have suffered in large part because of the withdrawal of electric vehicle subsidies by Donald Trump. The US president has also removed emissions regulations that incentivized electric car production. Tesla also faced a backlash from some consumers after Musk's embrace of far-right politics at the end of 2024. Tesla's deliveries slumped to 418,200 in the final quarter of the year, below the average forecast of analysts. Sales for 2025 were down by 9% compared with 2024.
And finally, 2026 is bringing a monetary change in Syria. Damascus launched a banknote swap, replacing old currency in an effort to stabilize the value of the pound and revive the economy under new leadership.
Syrians started to swap old banknotes for new ones on Saturday under a plan to replace Assad-era notes to try to strengthen the currency's value. Syria's new government, led by President Ahmed al-Sharaa, is seeking to rebuild state institutions and revive the economy after more than a decade of war, sanctions, and financial isolation that left the local currency severely weakened. The new banknotes will have 2 zeros less than the old ones to try to restore public confidence in the severely devalued pound. Some bankers have voiced fears the new currency could drive up inflation and further erode the purchasing power of Syrians reeling from high prices. But central bank governors said the operation will take place through a smooth and orderly swap. Assad fled Syria in December 2024 for Russia after rebels seized Damascus following an 8-day blitz through the country, ending 6 decades of his family's autocratic rule, more than 13 years after an uprising had spiraled into civil war. Syria marked earlier this month the first anniversary of the removal of Bashar al-Assad, with jubilant celebrations in major cities.
And that is a wrap on the business brief for tonight. On the note of those banknotes, back to you, Guy.
Andy, a very, very busy start to the year indeed for business news. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at President Ilham Aliyev's annual press conference outlining Azerbaijan's diplomatic priorities, energy strategy, regional connectivity, and plans for Karabakh revival. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. President Ilham Aliyev used his annual press conference to set out Azerbaijan's strategic direction, ranging from high-level diplomacy in Washington to shifting energy priorities. Well, he addressed regional connectivity, economic momentum, security balance, and Karabakh's revival, signaling confidence in new corridors, stronger partnerships, and a faster-moving geopolitical landscape amid ongoing talks, infrastructure plans, defense posture, and expanding trade links regionally and globally. Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss all of this is our very own Orkan Amashov. Orkan, always great to see you. Happy New Year to you, of course.
Happy New Year to you, Guy.
So much is covered in these presses. I had the honour of covering last year's presser, and I was really struck at just how much detail is covered. I mean, they go on for a long time. This year's presser was no exception to that. Just take us through what we know about this journey from the Washington trilateral meeting with President Trump and Prime Minister Pashinyan, and how that then has fed into where we are today with the country's strategic objectives.
Well, Guy, the 8th of August 2025, this date will go down in the annals of history as one of the most consequential dates in the history of this region, South Caucasus. That was the day when Azerbaijan and Armenia initialed the peace agreement, agreed on the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. And the first question put to President Aliyev today was actually about the key achievement of this year. And he deliberated very extensively, as was the case when you were part of that privileged media delegation interviewing President Aliyev, on the key aspects of what happened last year. Azerbaijan sorted out everything on the battlefield, basically, from year 2020 to 2023, September of that year. Everything was sorted out. The facts on the ground changed. And then, of course, diplomacy became a mode of dealing with the problems and fixing, ultimately, what is the peace agreement between these two countries. In Washington, in the presence of Donald Trump, the president of the most consequential, important, and powerful country in the world, President Aliyev, effectively translated the local regional achievement into the global scope. I think it's very important to distinguish between two fundamental things, and President Aliyev's first reply, basically reflects on that. Azerbaijan achieved everything on its own. It wasn't thanks to any third party. Yes, of course, geopolitical circumstances were favoring Azerbaijan's victory, in a sense that Azerbaijan built a very strong army, Turkey was there, limiting any third-party interference. By third party, we understand any interference from Iran and mostly, of course, from Russia. But process became bilateral in late 2023. But what happened in Washington was merely the fixation of everything. And there's a huge appreciation for what happened. There's a huge acknowledgement that President Trump played an important role. President Aliyev reflected on the strategic charter, which is very important. As long as this year is concerned, year 2026, there are a couple of things that need to be attained in Azerbaijani-US dynamics. First of all, that strategic charter, which is still being prepared. The working group on its preparation was established in August, and this year it needs to be concluded. Amendment Section 907 to the Freedom Support Act needs to be removed. President Aliyev was very clear, as I'm sure our audience knows only too well. It was first, of course, instituted in 1992, and then from 2001 onwards, it was practically on an annual basis was kind of suspended up until 2023, and then now intention is to completely get rid of it, because the logic there is that it was an anomaly. In 1992, when Azerbaijani territories were occupied by Armenians during the First Karabakh War, the United States decided to punish Azerbaijan, which was under massive pressure, with territories being occupied. And of course, the role played by Armenian diaspora was massively important back then. But times change, and we are changing with the times. With Trump administration, there's a massive, massive opportunity, and President Aliyev reflected on all of this. I mean, it was a 4-hour interview. You were part of the interview last year. President Aliyev is an incredibly capable articulator of finer points of diplomacy and geopolitics, and from relations with the United States to the dynamics involving China, green energy, Karabakh's revival, Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process, the situation in Armenia and Prime Minister Pashinyan, or rather the administration led by Pashinyan, and their reluctance to complete infrastructure plans in southern Armenia, commensurate with Trump route for international peace and prosperity, was discussed by President Aliyev, and it was a very long interview. So we need to actually, this is live, of course, we need to go through it properly, dissect it, compartmentalize it, and provide a post-meeting, post-interview analysis at a later stage. But now we're really reflecting on the basis of what we are able to know to extract.
Yes, indeed. And looking, from the most powerful country in the world, the #1 economy, moving eastwards now to the second biggest economy in the world, another great power. We heard today, didn't we, about closer ties with China too?
Yes, indeed. As any other actor with a sense of proportion and measure, and with a sense of geopolitical centrality, Azerbaijan is exercising geopolitical balancing act. Good relation with the United States is absolutely vital. So are the relations with China, of course. President Aliyev himself mentioned, whilst responding to, I believe, second question about China dimension, back in 2024, summer 2024, Azerbaijan signed a strategic partnership agreement with China, which was later upgraded and became comprehensive strategic partnership, which effectively entails everything from trade to commerce, green energy, and so forth. And this relation will need to be updated. And Azerbaijan is, by the way, China's biggest partner in the South Caucasus. Trade turnover between these two countries, I think, already reached $4 billion US dollar figure, which is a considerable figure. By the way, corresponding figure with the United States is only about $1 billion US dollar. So what President Aliyev said, and allow me to reflect on that, he said that basically, had Biden stayed in power, or administration of Democrats stayed in power, Azerbaijan-Armenian peace deal would not have been initial in Washington. There's a strong connection between the rise of Donald Trump, as his second rise, his presidency, and the current reality we're facing. That would not have happened under Democrats. President Aliyev made that absolutely clear. And I think there was one particular point where he said that in his internal communications with politicians, officials representing that administration, he said that one day you would need us, probably would not react in a way that you wanted us to react. With Trump administration, there is a completely new reality. There's a huge appreciation for Trump's foreign policy regarding this region. But also, of course, President Aliyev made some interesting, very subtle points. He talked about international law, the primacy of international law, and some of the challenges that many countries are facing when it comes to the implementation of international law. He's talked about this particular principle, which is widely referred to as might is right, and he effectively criticized it. He said that Azerbaijan achieved the implementation of international law not because international community was very much in favor of justice, but because Azerbaijan was powerful enough. So you need to be fair, you need to be just, but also you need to be powerful, because being just and fair, not good enough.
President Trump then clearly as a catalyst for peace, if not the catalyst.
In this region, yes, indeed.
In this region. And again, potentially a big effect in terms of opening up the future prosperity in the region. I mean, you spoke about the connection between President Trump, President Aliyev. In a sense now the US seeing Azerbaijan as a gateway, a conduit to doing more business in this part of the world.
There seems to be clear realization on the side of the Trump administration, at least officials who advised President Donald Trump, that Azerbaijan is indeed an increasingly important country. If you want to have, if you want to gain access to Central Asia, you need to gain that access via South Caucasus. And in South Caucasus, Azerbaijan is a vital country. President Aliyev extensively explained Azerbaijan's membership in different international organizations. There was a particular focus on D8 organization, developing 8 countries, which are Muslim majority countries with members of the Global South. And as President Aliyev mentioned, Azerbaijan, in terms of its geography and size of its nominal GDP, may be a small country, but membership in that organization, D8, which actually, I think it is covering the territory inhabited by 1 million people, and also overall nominal GDP being $4 trillion US dollars. It's a sign of appreciation of Azerbaijan's unique qualities. He talked about that. He talked extensively about Central Asia +1 becoming Central Asia 6. He talked about Azerbaijan's relationship with China, as I mentioned earlier, which is now actually being upgraded into comprehensive strategic partnership. He talked about Azerbaijan's energy export capabilities with a particular emphasis on Syria. And that is very important in the context of understanding what's happening between US and Azerbaijan. So basically, on the 8th of August, it's not just about bilateral relations between Washington and Baku, which are very important. It's also about Azerbaijan-Armenia dimension. Plus, it's about Azerbaijan's slow and incremental increase of Azerbaijan's influence in the Middle East. I think Israeli dimension is absolutely key there to bear in mind, in particular, because Azerbaijan is slowly increasing its presence in Syria. Azerbaijan's energy export capabilities. There was a talk of 1 BCM export to Syria, Abraham Accords. I have not managed to watch that full interview in its full entirety because it became available very soon. But the parts that I've seen were incredibly, incredibly instructive.
And the D8 is an organisation that certainly since my time of being in Baku, I've seen gradually, steadily rise in prominence. I think the theoretical potential for the D8 has obviously always been there, but it is starting now, isn't it, to be spoken about as something that has real teeth, can really deliver, has real utility in the world.
But D8 is only one of those organizations. It's a very big organization, massive size, great geography, very diverse geography. You've got Nigeria there, you also got Indonesia, for example, you've got some Central Asian countries, you've got Pakistan there. Basically, the reality there is that Azerbaijan, as a relatively small country, without an access to ocean, needs to slowly augment its geopolitical presence. And membership in different organizations is an important part of that policy. In that sense, D8, Central Asia +1 becoming Central Asia 6, even the closer interaction with Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Organization of Turkish State, which Azerbaijan's actual family, President Aliyev made it a couple of times very clear. For the first time, I think it was in 2024, he said that we have only one family, and that is a Turkic family. Therefore, the membership in the Organization of Turkish States is very central to Azerbaijan's future growth and international prestige. Basically, if you want to be influential, you have to have a seat at top tables all over the place in different parts of the world. And D8 is a really growing organization. You and I attended the media-related development of D8 a few months ago, which was about the effective communication. And we saw different dignitaries from different countries coming and Azerbaijan becoming a sort of central player, attracting like a magnet all of those countries. And effectively setting the standards. Because when you're small, your geography is not that massive. It's by multilateral diplomacy that you're growing, you're increasing your influence. And D8 in that context is incredibly, incredibly important, of course.
What did the President have to say, Orkan, about energy? Because we know, obviously, we've had the success of COP29, we've had a successful handover to COP30. Traditional energy still playing an important role, but more and more this transition to green energy is becoming more and more important, isn't it?
It is very important. Azerbaijan hosted COP29. Azerbaijan was incredibly helpful for Brazil during COP30. But your question is about green energy and the balance between fossil fuels and green energy. President Aliyev, in reference to the current mood dominating and pervading in the United States, reflected on the necessity of being reasonable, basically. When he said that, of course, naturally, green energy is the future. You need to have the proper balance. But achieving net zero ambition is not for Azerbaijan at this juncture, it's for other countries. But basically, without depriving yourself of the opportunity to utilize your natural resources, your natural gas resources, you can increase your green energy prowess and have a proper climate-friendly balance. That's what I inferred from what President Aliyev said. Basically, we know the current reality, which is dominating the global landscape. The United States is very skeptical about this climate-related matters. President Donald Trump does not believe in climate change in many ways. He has been very clear about that. So when you have the world's biggest polluter, together with China, which does not show any enthusiasm towards achieving climatic ambitions, when you have a biggest country in the world withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, what you could expect? You would expect that naturally you need to very carefully and judiciously use your own natural gas resources. You should be very climate conscious. Simultaneously, you shouldn't be very radical. It will take some time. So, I mean, if you choose between climate rejection, or rather rejection of anything related to climate diplomacy, and acceptance of the extreme scenario, you should be reasonable, you should be in the middle. I think that's what President Aliyev said. We should be very reasonable. The world's biggest country does not believe in that. We have our own policy. We need to increase our green credentials. And Azerbaijan has already taken very consequential steps in the direction of export of green energies. Azerbaijan is actually implementing this policy in Karabakh Economic Region, and also in East Zangezur economic region, basically. But all in good measure, all in good time. That's what I inferred from what he said, basically.
And talking about Zangezur, to some it's the Zangezur corridor, to others it's the Trip corridor. Where are we with that potentially groundbreaking, world-changing initiative?
I'm very glad you asked this question, Guy, because I was literally, whilst responding to your previous question, I was thinking about that, and I wanted to make that point. I'm glad you asked it. President Ali responded to one particular question there, I think very interesting. There was a question posed by one of the journalists, which was along the following lines. Would the fact that the corridor or the infrastructure now being named after President Donald Trump, should it be deemed as a positive factor, and will it actually intensify the implementation of the project? That was an actual question. Well, President Aliyev, of course, responded to this in a very positive way. And he said it a number of times that the fact that this named after Donald Trump is a good thing, and it means that there's some sort of guarantee that it will happen. But he also criticized Armenian side. He said that we, Azerbaijan and Turkey, did everything that was supposed to be done, but Armenia is not doing is not fulfilling its task. Nothing in the southern Armenia, in that geographical part of Armenia, which nothing indicates that Armenia has started job. Well, it is a US-Armenia matter. Basically, according to the trip arrangement, US and Armenia would agree on the way it would be constructed, but we have seen no sign of it. And we also know that Prime Minister Pashinyan has been insistent on mentioning northern route, Kazakh-Ijevan route, has been very insistent on the Turkish-Armenian normalization without saying anything about the quicker implementation of TRIP. From all of this, we can cumulatively infer that President Aliyev has got some skepticism about the way Armenia is fulfilling its own obligation. I'm not saying that this was an open criticism. It was literally the Azerbaijani expression of concern, and President Aliyev made it very clear. Armenia has done absolutely nothing physically on the ground in southern Armenia in the context of that infrastructure. That should happen at some point soon, but it hasn't started yet.
And the rejuvenation, revitalization of Karabakh as a region, it's a region I've been to 2 or 3 times now and seen some of the changes, the developments taking place there. There is a huge amount of activity going on in the region. What was said today about the role that Karabakh is going to continue to play in Azerbaijan's future?
As I mentioned earlier, Guy, Azerbaijan, when it comes to the implementation of some of the modern technology, green technology, smart city methodology, Karabakh is a test case. It's a space where actually all of these things being implemented. There will be an urban forum in Azerbaijan this year, I believe in May. So Karabakh is a place where Azerbaijan is judiciously implementing everything which is modern, forward-looking about this country. Karabakh's importance will increase in the context of Zangezur corridor as well. This is a territory which was under occupation for 30 years, and a huge amount of money is being spent to recover and revitalize that part of Azerbaijan. This is absolutely crucial. And also in terms of urban construction, Shusha, Khankandi, many other places, some of those places are being rebuilt. Some of them they were razed to the ground, therefore they're being actually built from scratch. And this is very important for Azerbaijan economy, because this economy is going to be in some form of transition, right? So we always talk about that, non-oil sector should grow, Azerbaijan should have a more competitive, resilient economy, and some of the things that Azerbaijani economists, the members of Azerbaijani, the cabinet talk about, they're going to be visible in the Karabakh region. Also, connectivity comes as an equation. That's part of the interview where he talked about local affairs of the country, very incredibly important, but nothing which is of national, local dimension should be viewed outside the wider international structure. And Karabakh War changed everything about this country. Organization of Turkic states is a very important part of Azerbaijan's geopolitical posture. And that organization, as we discussed last time, I remember, was transformed into international organization in 2021, year after the Karabakh War. I don't think that was incidental. It was a result of Azerbaijani victory and and Azerbaijan realizing this is a high time to connect Turkey with Central Asia. So there is a very strong connection between the outcomes of the war and the current situation in the country, current situation when it comes to connectivity and wider geopolitical situation. Azerbaijan, despite its size, which is very modest, we talk about 600,000 square kilometers. It's a size of Austria or Portugal, but this country does not have access to ocean. Its economy is not really massive, has managed to lay the foundations of its future growth. And the part of that future growth is deeply connected with capitalizing on geography, energy export capabilities, and international prestige. Azerbaijan is exporting natural gas to Syria. That was completely unthinkable just a year ago. This shows the reach of the country. Azerbaijan is a standard setter within the confines of Organization of Turkish States. That was not unthinkable. It was not thinkable a few years ago. So, I mean, it's a bit like, I mean, I don't want to compare United Kingdom to Azerbaijan. There's a very typical phrase used in connection with Britain, punching above its weight. After the collapse of the empire, Britain was punching above its weight, but still, of course, the case. And Azerbaijan is also, in its own unique way, in a different way, punching above its weight in this geography.
One of the things that I know only too well as a Brit that the UK can struggle with at times, or is building things quickly. Yeah. One of the things that's amazed me about spending some time in Karabakh, looking at the individual projects, is not just the speed of the builds, but also the thoughtfulness, because there's incredible complexity, isn't there, in many of these projects, whether it's the train station at Agdam, some of the towns and villages, thinking about not just the logistics, the infrastructure, the architecture, but also developing the ability for people to rebuild lives, build communities, enjoy life as family members, as colleagues again. Now that's something that requires a huge amount of thought as well as resources.
Absolutely, it's a combination of expertise, drive, ambition, and proper, of course, consultancy. So you're choosing who you like to listen to, basically. What happened over the past few years in the Karabakh region effectively testifies to that very important moment in Azerbaijan's internal dimension. Because basically, I'll give you one very important example. You talked about timing and doing things very, very quickly. According to 10 November Declaration, which was signed in 2020, Azerbaijan was to build new Lachin Road, I think that was by 2022. So, and it could have been done a bit later as well. But what Azerbaijan did, there was a process of replacing old Lachin corridor with a new Lachin Road. Azerbaijan built a new road very quickly, and by August 2022, that was ready. And interestingly enough, that was a very crucial moment in terms of integrating that geography, that part of the country, into the rest of the country. And that did show, if you have a clear ambition regarding your vision, you know what you want to achieve, you need to act very quickly. Azerbaijan acted incredibly quickly in the Karabakh Economic Region. Before the establishment of full sovereignty, because full sovereignty in Karabakh was established in September 2023, there are certain actions that needed to be done very quickly. One of them was replacing the old Lachin corridor with a new Lachin road. And it was back then, Guy, and that takes us back to the oligarch's design, the Enius production, that Ruben Vardanyan, Russian oligarch, came to this region, because that was the moment when he realized that the idea of separating Karabakh from the rest of the country would be futile. He needed to instill that illusion that wouldn't happen. So my example is very, very, very much connected with Vardanyan's arrival in this region. And the same applies to the rest of the process. Of course, the Khan Kandi, the Shusha, reconstruction, things are done very, very quickly, because time waits for no man. It doesn't wait for Azerbaijan present as well, and for us either.
Indeed. Orkan, always a pleasure to have you in the studio. Thank you
very much. Hope that after examining this interview properly, we will have an opportunity to discuss it very, very carefully.
No doubt we will. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of Prime Time for tonight. Please do join us again tomorrow evening for more insight, analysis and perspective from here in Baku and around the world. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.